Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, when Albert decided to take 5 minutes to start his speech, we knew who was going forth already. To be frank, I have three argumentations that I want to run in this debate. Number one, I'll be talking about the emotional and psychological trauma that demobilizes society within their policy. Secondly, we're talking about how we delegitimize other forms of alternatives that are currently in existence in status quo, especially for the long term. And lastly, we're talking about how it further empowers regimes that they so want to remove. But before that, 2 points of rebuttal. Number one, the only form of attack we've heard from side-opening government with regards to the three argumentations of Max was that alternatives does not disprove the legitimacy of suicide. First and foremost, you need to prove its legitimacy to tell us that alternatives can't work. But let's give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe your first speaker and you did that, right? Secondly, with regards to this particular problem, we feel that these problems are mechanistic problems in nature and it can be fixed. This isn't a state of emergency or a fail state or a state of war. Because if this is a context you're talking about, an emergency, state of emergency, war, people are dying on the streets, these people wouldn't have to commit suicide, they'd probably get shot anyways, right? So with regards to the reasonableness of whether or not alternatives can exist, we think for side opening opposition, alternatives do exist. You can't do that anymore. Your closing now needs to defend these alternatives, right? Lastly, I'm talking about further alternatives in my argumentation. Lastly, the second idea is the idea of the greater impact, because it's an active choice. We heard it in his POI and in his speech, that the moment you set yourself on fire or you kill yourself on the spot, there's a direct response that the state needs to take upon this particular incident, right? No, thank you. Sit down. We feel that, I only need one response to this, right? We feel that this particular response, if it does come about from the state, it is a very face value response coming up from the state. Because you have to understand one very simple fact. The characterization that they gave you of this particular regime, or these failed states under their own words, right, are regimes that want to oppress these people at the end of the day. So if you want to look at the type of policies that will come out in response to these people, or this person committing suicide, it wouldn't be substantial and it wouldn't be for the long term. It will probably be satisfactory for the people on the ground for that point in time. Because let's look at the words he used, right? It's an impact now. So the impact or response that the state would want to use will be of now, not for the future. And this is why we feel this policy fails miserably. Furthermore, we think Max talked about a hell of a lot more than just the crap that he gave us from rebuttals, right? Number one, he talked about the irrationality and how this is self-destructive choice that only empowers these regimes further. No response. There's principal argumentation of why this choice is bad and self-destructive for not only this person because he removes or she removes the existence from this world, but also makes it even more impossible for any form of substantial change to happen in the long run. He also talked about internet accountability. No thank you. With regards to how the international community perceives this problem and aids these people on the ground. Under their particular policy, no accountability happens. The international community doesn't see a need to intervene there because you only see people committing suicide. But under their paradigm, these people are unhappy. These people are dissatisfied and depressed. There is no cause for international community to come about. Three argumentations. Number one, emotional and psychological trauma that demobilizes society. This is by a utilitarian standard, right? It doesn't satisfy the standards of happiness that we think is required in this debate. First and foremost, Max has already said, the only way possible now is that you're empowering the idea that death is the only way out. I'll substantiate on this further, right? It shows that society is weak. It shows that society has removed themselves from a position to hope and want to make that change in the future. And this is a very big problem. Emotionally and psychologically, family units on the ground that make up that society lose family members and feel dissatisfied and further unhappy, not with the fact that they're unhappy with the regime now, unhappy that their children are dead, unhappy that their husbands are dying, unhappy that their daughters are dying. And this is something that's been shown in the Libyan crisis with regards to Gaddafi sending his troops or militias raping the women and children or daughters in his households, right? This is an impact. It's a psychological and traumatic impact upon these people with regards to the suicide that happens towards them. It shows that the community and society isn't ready to society isn't ready to make any form of change, right? Because the only way out for them right now is that I need to die now. The only way out for me is suicide, but they are empowering. No, Albert.
But sir, if we can glorify the noble sacrifices of soldiers serving in war and acknowledge the effectiveness of that sacrifice, why not?
See, this is the problem. This is why I asked the question earlier, right? You want to make fun of it. This is the problem, right? You confuse your closing. The problem with suicide and troops and firemen going into the buildings that are building is extremely different. They want to save lives, right? These individuals are giving up, and you talked about it earlier because it's the only opportunity or only choice that they can make. This is why you're trapping them with telling us that the only way out or the only choice that you can make is suicide. Soldiers fight for patriotism and their countries. Firemen run into burning buildings to save lives, sacrificing their lives at the cost of other lives. The reason for that is because they see value in life. He talked about it, no response. Second idea, the idea of delegitimizes alternatives that are long-term in nature. Now let's look at what exists now. You have discourse from NGOs, these are democratic movements that exist. You have activism that exists within these nations, right? I'll give you examples in Kenya, Egypt, South Africa. How do you think the South African apartheid regime was toppled? Were people committing suicide? No. It was the fact that people collectively got together, worked as an activist group and a democratic movement to topple the idea that it's okay to be racist, it's okay to discriminate the blacks and let the whites rule. This is how you delegitimize other alternatives that can work in the long run for a short-term goal that even you can't prove. Lastly is the idea of further empowering these regimes. People are dying. They said that people are already being killed. People may lose their lives. How is it much difficult for a regime now to stranglehold that power and authority when people are dying now? It's much easier because you don't have the opposition. Because the greatest source or resource on earth is human capital. You cannot impact the life of another person if you haven't lived life yourself. To have that kind of impact, you must be part of that process. The fight, the good fight, not just the big picture of what happens. The bigger picture is the fact that you value that life and you value that your cost. The cost of democracy, the cost of liberalization or liberty in the end of the day is only achieved by the fact that you disempower this regime. Your policy empowers these regimes and make them even more authoritarian because at the end of the day, all they have to do is just sit and wait because people are killing themselves.
Yeah.